Hi Saleel, lovely to have you here. I'm sure the audience is also looking forward to this conversation, and I mean, in today's world, diverse teams are not just a metric of success, but it's an absolute necessity. And to kick off, I'd like to start off by asking you, what advice would you have for organizations that have, just started focusing on DEI in their recruitment strategy?
Thanks, Rebekkah. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and hi everybody, good afternoon. This topic, when it was suggested, I really felt very strongly about it because it's a part of a strong passion that I have within TA. And when this particular question, I think of, I have to say that, we have decided, by the way, me and Rebekkah, we're just going to take two questions amongst us, and then we are going to open the floor because, I saw the involvement in the previous session, how many questions you all wanted to ask. So we said, why don't we go to the audience rather than me just giving some information and some opinion. So, how do you start focusing on DEI if you are a newcomer, if you are focusing it for the first time? I would say from a recruitment standpoint, start small, start young. That would be my advice. Essentially, when I say start small, I would say that while diversity is a very broad topic, if you look at India, gender diversity seems to take the center stage. We will talk about LGBTQAI, we'll talk about other aspects, but gender diversity takes center stage. Even people with disabilities, you will see very few organizations really making concentrated efforts. So start small with gender diversity. That's the easy one to start with, and start young. My personal experience has been that ultimately, when you look at gender diversity, it's the future workforce, the young talent, what we call early careers in TA terminology, people with 0 to 5 years of experience. And I think this is where, a new organization making its entrance into diversity field should focus on. All of you in your own capacity will be hiring young talent. If we focus on getting diversity talent at that point in time, and then of course we have to build organizational culture to sustain that diversity. But focusing on middle management talent might be a little more challenging if you are a new organization entering this field. That would be my response.
So when you say start young, you're not only focused on the talent being young, but you're saying the sooner the better the organization starts, the sooner the better. And one thing that you mentioned, as you say, the main focus is on gender diversity. We don't focus that much on differently abled, which is, I think, a really great point. One more question before we open the floor is, you're someone who's responsible for global talent acquisition, so how do you integrate DEI goals with, broader corporate objectives like innovation, sustainability, and digital transformation?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question, how do you integrate with the broader organizational objectives? And what I have personally experimented with in my last two organizations, the current one and the previous one, is to say that who owns diversity, inclusivity and equity agenda? Often you will find leaders believe it's HR responsibility to take care of diversity. How do you shift that focus from HR to say this is a business agenda? How do you ensure that business takes ownership for this? HR is there to enable, support, guide, help. We will be helping you in achieving that agenda. So to answer your question, just the way innovation, sustainability are larger organizational agenda, DEI should be organizational agenda as well, not an HR agenda. I know that it is not easy. I know that naturally the Indian mindset, Indian psyche, ये तो HR का काम है. But that's where you need to get leaders buy-in. You'll have to work towards it. It's not easy. I took some time. It took me more than a year to get to a level where the leaders bought this concept that HR is there to support, enable, guide, and business is going to own the agenda. That's how I think we should combine it with the organizational agenda.
So you need the support of the entire management in various departments as well. So I'm sure, since you're saying it's not just HR, but it's a business agenda, I'm sure there's a lot of opinions in the audience as well. So I think we can open the floor.
Yeah.
So if
Happy to have questions.
I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions for Saleel. So any questions Please, we would love for this to be a two-way conversation. We'd love to hear from you as well. Questions, opinions, thoughts, please feel free to just raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you. Ma'am, could we get a mic up front?
I want to ask one question. Diversity, equity at workplace, and we hear a lot about what's the business case just for a leadership buy. But my question is there actually a business case? Do we have numbers to prove that having diversity, equity, inclusion in a workforce will impact the top and bottom line of the organization? Do we really have those numbers?
No, it's a great question. When we talk about business case, all the references, all the examples, they come from Western world. You don't get those examples in India yet. And the reason for that is, even today, when you look at diverse workforce, especially gender diversity, there are certain pockets where there is sufficient gender diverse workforce in an organization. But look at my example. I worked in pharmaceuticals and FMCG. Classical, brick and mortar companies where you have largest employee base of field force, sales executives, people who will go and sell chocolates. I was in Mondelez earlier, to Kirana stores, or in Sun Pharma today, people who will go and sell medicines to doctors. How many women will be really in a position to do that job? You cannot have 50% employee base in such an organization. So, to answer your question, in India, do we have business case barring maybe certain organizations in the sectors like IT, or when I'm in Bangalore, I always think of GCCs. If you look at GCC IT, definitely there is sufficient gender diversity, but the business case is being built right now. Do we have examples where you can establish, to your question, that this has helped the top line and bottom line growth? My personal experience is very, very few examples. I think India is going through that transition where over the period of next 5 to 10 years, you will have such examples, and maybe then you will get that support from India. But right now, you will have to take those examples from Western world. I'll finally say this. Ultimately, it's a given that we should have balanced workforce. I don't think we need examples of top line or bottom line growth alone. We need conviction of our own mind that just the way it is in society, all the organizations should have balanced workforce. Of course, it's not fair everywhere, but we have an opportunity to be fair in the corporate world. So that's really, to me, the stronger argument for the business leaders.
Before I pass on the mic, so pharma is one of those sectors which has very low gender diversity. Gender diversity is a low-hanging fruit. If any organization wants to start, it'll just plug that, okay, let me hire more women in the organization. So what steps is the pharma industry taking to increase its gender diversity? Because it's very low in pharma.
Sure. No, I mean, this is connected to the first point that I made. For any industry, especially brick and mortar sectors and sales-oriented organizations, you have to start young. So what we are trying to do, not only in sales, but even in our factories, and you will see some of the posts, we are trying to bring in more women at an early stage. Young graduates or ITI engineers in factories, or 12th pass or graduates as medical reps, and really help them build a career, maybe for a few years. We know that they are not going to be there in the industry doing the medical rep job for a long term. They will eventually look for a job which is office-based job, most of them, not all of them. But if I have to increase the number of gender diverse workforce in my organization, this is the area where I can achieve it. Bring in the fresh talent from colleges, 1-2 years of experience, train them, have them in your organization for 3, 4, 5 years. If you have them for 5 years, they will not continue after that maybe, but for those 5 years you're secured, and then it becomes continuous talent pool which keeps coming in.
So that is another problem that gender diversity India is facing. There are a lot of women in the entry level, but if you match the ratio with the number of women, which is there about 1:1, and you match them with the women in the senior management, it's a leaky pipeline. So I think we really need to look at the solution of making them climb the ladders to the senior management.
I completely agree with you. It's a very tough nut to crack, to be honest. And let's face it. I mean, I'm going to make some bold statements here. But Indian society operates in a particular way, and women will have certain life stages where they will take decisions, or the families take decisions for them, and women drop out from the workforce. Now that's the reality. So it's not easy. What you're saying is absolutely right. But we'll see. I think in 5 to 10 years things will change. That's what I believe.
We have just 2.5 minutes left. So any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? There's someone right at the back.
The specialist as Moderator. We are a legal tech company, and we're relatively very young, not in the startup space anymore, but at a growth space right now. And we're also looking at improving our diversity numbers. That being said, what is your idea of a good ratio, and what are the factors that affect, or the factors to consider in diversity hiring? I'm asking this as a relatively young person in this field. So I just wanted to understand what numbers are what is a healthy number or a ratio?
So every industry will have a different ratio. Okay, when I look at pharma, in my field force, if I have anything beyond 20% as medical reps, I think I'm doing very well. But I will not say that for a tech startup or a tech company in a growth phase. I think clearly there is an opportunity to have 50%. The representation of actual demographics should be there in a tech startup like yours. So the answer to your question is it differs from industry to industry, and we need to look at it that way. When you look at factories, again, you cannot have 50%. I mean, one is achieved that in one factory after a lot of efforts. But again, 30% in factories is good enough ratio. And what is the second part of your question, you said?
What are the factors that you consider while diversity hiring? Is it just the gender that we consider, or do we have any other factors while hiring for diversity?
Okay, so I think I mentioned that, I'll say it again. In India, the primary focus seems to be gender diversity. The cherry on the cake is talking about PWDs and talking about LGBTQI community, but that's not really a concentrated effort. I mean, when I talk about PWD, which is again a very high area of interest, hardly any organization is making concentrated effort for PWDs. We have Mirchi and Mine, a restaurant in Mumbai. I don't know how many of you know. They have done this. All their waiters and everybody is a person with who's differently abled. But otherwise, it's very difficult. Or Lemon Tree Hotel, you will see when you go there, they have made some concentrated efforts. So the answer to your question is, it is, in my view, the reality that I see is gender diversity is primary focus area when we talk about diversity.
Okay, that's pretty much it. Thank you so much.
Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? I think, ma'am, you seem like you want to ask one more question.
Actually, just sharing my...
I'll just get the mic to you, one second.
I work in this area of diversity, equity and inclusion, hence so much of rage is evident in what I'm saying. Yeah, so just wanted to say that let us not, 23%, let us achieve 23, but is that a great ratio? Obviously not. So let us look beyond as much as possible, bringing it 1:1. And as we said that gender diversity is a low-hanging fruit. It is the easiest, if there's a top-down pressure, it's the easiest form of adding diversity at workplace, hire more women. Where? We don't know. Hire more women at the entry level. Senior management, most of the verticals are empty. So gender diversity, but let us move beyond that. Physical, people with disability, neurodiversity. Caste diversity is something that is not spoken about, so something that even corporate India should look into caste diversity. Yes. Thank you. I'll just...
Ma'am's talking about gender diversity. One quick question for you. How would organizations actually shift their focus from only gender diversity to also including this differently abled, in your opinion?
I think it's a great question, and that rage that you talked about, ma'am, is there with me also, because I don't see that happening. And my honest submission is that we need to have that one leader or one leadership team which takes it up as their personal conviction and agenda. HR talking about it is not going to happen. It has to be top down. There aren't too many leaders who will say that, okay, PWD becomes a concentrated agenda for us. everybody would love to talk about it, but when it comes to doing things at the ground level, of course it's not that easy, because there is no direct advantage in terms of revenue, top line, bottom line, compared to what you have in terms of gender diversity impact. So it's more about having that conviction to make a social contribution to bring PWDs in the organization. And I personally feel that it has to come from the top. Somebody has to have that conviction.
For sure, then it drips right down into the organization. Lovely talking to you, Saleel. I'm sure people would love to hear more from you, but Saleel's going to be on the next panel as well. So thank you so much. Let's give him a warm round of applause.